Good morning, and welcome to today's techUK Data Ethics Conference. I'd very much hoped that I was going to be there today, and apologies that I'm not. I'd hoped to be before personal circumstances conspired against me, and I'm needed in Canada for family reasons. But I'm very glad to be able to contribute to the day by video. Thanks to the University of Victoria for the technical support. And to set the scene for what looks to be a compelling and important agenda. And I've had the privilege to speak to you in the last 2 years. So conference number 3, it's a great privilege. I'm also assured, too, that I am well represented in the room by Simon McDougall, the ICO's Executive Director of Innovation. And many of you know Simon, and I know that he'll be able to answer any of the hard questions you may have after my prepared remarks. And also, accompanying Simon, I'm pleased to introduce Ellis Perry, who is our recently appointed Data Ethics Advisor. And I think Ellis's appointment is one that I'm really excited about. When I spoke at this conference 2 years ago, I talked about the value of ethical considerations dictating innovation's direction of travel. And Ellis's appointment is a demonstration of that commitment, and it's a demonstration of progress and of today's theme of putting ethics into action. When I talk about ethics, my focus is on personal data. And that's where I'm going to be focusing on in my remarks today. But while digital ethics, we know, is a broader topic, so often the personal data aspect is the point where digital innovation meets people. And so today, I want to talk about 3 key questions in digital ethics, in data ethics, that I think we as a community really need to be thinking about. I'll start, as I so often do when I consider the impact our work has on people, by talking about my friend and colleague, Giovanni Bertarelli. For any of you who may not be aware, Giovanni was the European Data Protection Supervisor who sadly passed away earlier this year. For any of you who think that data protection regulators are kind of a dull lot, you never met my friend, Giovanni Bertarelli. He was cosmopolitan. He was a polyglot, charming, diplomatic, patient, and kind. His skill was seeing the bigger picture and how data protection impacts the minutiae of people's lives. And this was reflected in his posthumously published manifesto, Privacy 2030, A New Vision for Europe. And Giovanni's manifesto demonstrates the positive view that he had towards technology and all that technology can achieve. Not achievements like colonizing Mars or reversing the aging process, as he puts it, but technology for the good of the people. And he talks in detail how data can help improve the environment for future generations. Tech can be and is a force for good. But Giovanni is clear in the manifesto that he saw the benefits digital innovation were being unevenly allocated. He writes about a growing gap between people with the financial and intellectual means to control their own digital lives, and people who Giovanni felt were seen as merely the objects of technology or of data processing. This idea of a digital underclass cannot sit easily with any of us, with any of you in this room. It certainly sits uncomfortably with me as a regulator. An ethical approach to data is not optional. The law makes no room for appropriate safeguards being offered only to those who can afford them or to those who have the time and the expertise to understand their rights. We're all aware that the law makes requirements, puts requirements on organizations that are processing data. People have the right to see the information about them. People have the right to rectify that information and to object to its processing, to name just 3 rights in the law. But we're also aware, too, that most people won't exercise those rights. Most people won't engage with an organization who's processing their personal data. The law provides these people with these protections nevertheless. And that's why accountability is so important. And as we know, accountability remains the key upgrade that the GDPR brought. So data ethics requires transparency and fairness and accountability. Transparency, fairness, and accountability are also provisions in the law. And accountability means organizations have to consider the risks that their data processing is creating for people, all people, regardless of wealth or education, data protection by default and design. So the law does provide some resistance to digital inequality. I think, though, that most of us would say more needs to be done. Just a gut feeling. And so that's our first tough question this morning. How are we, as a digital community, monitoring whether a digital underclass is forming? But let's go back to Giovanni. Giovanni was Italian by birth. He was working in Brussels, and he was a frequent commentator and speaker across the world, particularly engaged in US media. But that's how data protection works now. Protecting citizens and consumers' data rights requires an international, a global approach. And to that end, I chair the Global Privacy Assembly, the group formerly known as the ICD-PPC, which brings together almost 180 data protection and privacy regulators around the world. One of the challenges regulators face when we come together is that all of us come from such different starting points, different legal systems, different cultures, different regulations. And so while we love to talk about convergence, and indeed that was the theme of the GPA's conference when we met in Tirana, Albania a few weeks ago, it just isn't always easy to find the common lexicon for such discussions. And I want to ask my second tough question here. Could data ethics provide a common language for greater global convergence? And because, while we do not share all the same ethical perspectives within this room, let alone around the world, I think ethics does give us a basis for a shared conversation. If you just take, for example, facial recognition technology, the King's Cross case brought a lot of attention, and my office stepped in to consider the legal implications of how that data processing complied with the GDPR, an active case. Internationally, other regulators are dealing with similar cases, but we struggle as regulators to compare notes. The GDPR is only common, as you know, across the EU, and a broader view shows different laws and different attitudes to state surveillance. But perhaps data ethics provides us with some common ground and acceptance that there is at least a balance to be struck between privacy and security, and an acceptance that in a democracy there needs to be a level of public debate and social discourse. I think it's an idea that needs more exploration, whether data ethics provides a common lexicon for a global conversation. And of course, when we talk about international conversations, we're not just talking about the Western world. And perhaps a data ethics lexicon only goes so far. And when I think about this question, I ask myself, what would Giovanni do? Giovanni would talk about the need for bridges. And I was buoyed by his confidence in me as a bridge between the North American business approach to data protection and the European human rights approach. And now, I think we need to build those bridges further, something that is central to my work as the Global Privacy Assembly Chair. I hope that I've inherited Giovanni's ambition to achieve that. I think this idea of a data ethics language also has a role domestically. I think any data ethics paper ends up touching on the risk of algorithmic bias and whether a predominantly white, male, middle-class developer sector may be inadvertently producing digital products that are inherently unfair. And I won't rehearse that argument here. I think we all know it in this room. But if we're asking tough questions, do we have the right people at the table guarding against that bias? So my third and my final question, are there enough voices in the data ethics conversation? Are there enough voices? This is a question about whether we're being consultative enough and whether we're consulting with the right people in the right ways. A good example is my office's experience around our guidance on how organizations can better explain AI to those that are impacted by its decisions. And the draft guidance was published last week, and it's informed by the discussions like the ones at this conference on topics like accountability and human explainability. But it was quickly clear to us that if we wanted to have a positive impact with this guidance, then we needed to involve the people who the guidance was aimed at ultimately benefiting. And so we spoke to people. We organized citizens' juries, and we asked them to give us a steer on when they expected AI decisions to be explained and how much explanation they expected, what was working for them. I think all of us would agree that the talk we hear of public consultation from organizations often doesn't match the proper public voice that could inform the design of final products. So I think we need to work harder as regulators, as innovators, to reach out to those whose experiences can inform a truly representative consultation. And maybe we need to approach these conversations not through the prism of complex legislation, but through the prism of a broader data ethics set of questions. Oh, and incidentally, Helena Quinn, one of the authors of this guidance, is with you today, and she's on your accountability and explainability panel later. And I'm sure she's also going to be happy to answer any tough questions the guidance has prompted. So, 3 key questions then. How can our digital community monitor whether a digital underclass is forming? And secondly, could data ethics provide a common language for greater global convergence? And third tough question, are there enough voices in the data ethics conversation? And I know these are not questions that any of us can answer individually. And while the ICO has appointed a data ethics advisor to knit together our legal discussions with ethical discussions, our ambition is to better engage in that conversation, but not to lead it. Data ethics must be a discussion in which all of us contribute. So regulators, academia, policymakers, civil society, and so crucially, the technologists and the innovators who so often direct the data processing and have a clear responsibility to take the lead here. And fortunately, although you can see me and I can't see you, that's precisely who we have in the room today. So enjoy your discussions. I look forward to hearing from Simon the results of the day. Thank you very much to Sue Daly for continuing to invite me to be part of your event, and I hope it's as practical as ever. Goodbye from Canada. Enjoy your day.